Jonathan, you touched on the FDA a little bit, and it's an organization I think you know quite well. Can you talk about the history of it, why it was established, its original intent, and how it's evolved?
Well, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle during the Progressive Era created this notion in people's minds that food manufacturing companies were derelict and were making food with filthy ingredients, and that there needed to be a federal regulatory establishment. During the Progressive Era, many policymakers in Washington were swept with the idea that social planning, that government planning was superior to free market operations and would result in superior production of products and so forth. This notion has been proven false, I think, numerous times in the history of the world. And you know, looking at the Soviet Union and Communist China before market revolution in Communist China, you have to ask yourself whether universal mediocrity is superior to universal upward mobility and the opportunity and the expansion of the economy that comes from a free market. And I think by any stretch of the imagination, you better put it after the fact prosecution of parties who adulterate foods with knowledge that they have done so and probable cause to go after them, than a presumption prior restraint type system like we have now, which limits freedom of everyone on the supposition that some will violate the law. And of course, those who would violate the law don't care about the prior restraint anyway. It's only the law abiding the by. But this fervor generated by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle swept the nation. People were thinking that processed foods were probably contaminated, not just beef packing in Chicago, but probably all over the country. And it created a bit of a hysteria that was used then to be translated into an argument for regulation. At first, the FDA was focused on testing periodically foods, responding to complaints about foods being contaminated. It was relatively benign by modern standards. But in the 1960s, the FDA acquired, under the Kefauver-Harris amendments, a extraordinary power to determine the safety and efficacy of drugs as a precondition to market approval of them, drugs, medical devices, biologics. And at the same time, consistent with a pattern of FDA decision-making, foods consistently were relegated to the status of substances only usable for taste or aroma, and to a degree nutritive value. But the government was heavily suppressing that treatment information or therapeutic information about foods and supplements. The Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is very interesting in that it does establish a monopoly for the drug industry and gives the agency broad powers to enforce monopoly protection, so trademark protection and patent protection that is ordinarily a private party's obligation. In the case of drugs, the government assumes that role, and this is all part and parcel of the negotiation in Congress between large companies that were producing drugs and members of Congress, and then also regulators at first from the Department of Commerce and other agencies of the government. And it coalesced in a series of tragedies that occurred as a result of substances being imported as drugs that were unsafe and caused injury. And this became an argument for regulation. Then they adopted the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act in the 1930s. And then after that, Kefauver-Harris, as I mentioned, in the 60s. And the definition of a drug that is in the Act is based on the representations made to the public, not on its biochemical nature. So you could have defined a drug based on its biochemistry, saying that it is a synthetic substance, patentable, that is designed for use in the treatment of disease and has a therapeutic effect, such as reducing the incidence of disease or mitigating a disease. Instead, they focused on the broader spectrum, which enables them to have a significant monopoly presence, and that is to focus on what is said. So a drug is defined not by its biochemistry or its synthetic nature or its patented nature, but rather it is defined as any article, anything in the world, that is promoted for the purpose of treating, preventing, or mitigating a disease. As a consequence, prune juice can be a drug. And anything that is a drug that is not approved with claims approved by the FDA is an unapproved drug, and the sale of it is a felony. Those who sell it can be prosecuted, can be arrested, they can have all their products confiscated, they can be enjoined from selling it in the future. And this creates a very draconian set of government actions available in the arsenal of the FDA to completely obliterate any source of competition to the agency's approved drugs. Of course, it's in the political power interest of the political appointees of the agency to use these mechanisms to ensure that only drugs carry therapeutic claims. This skews the marketplace dramatically because it creates this paradigm in which the consumer regards foods as simply for consumption, taste, and has little knowledge of supplements other than a multivitamin might be good for you. Most individuals have very, very little knowledge about the specific role of nutritional ingredients in their health or in disease prevention. And they cleave to physicians and to the prescription drug process whenever they become ill. So we have a health crisis environment rather than looking at health as a work in progress for every human being that must be undertaken throughout your lifetime. The choices made in your diet and exercise and your lifestyle will have an effect upon your health in various ways, and so steering in the right direction can pay big dividends and greater longevity, fewer incidents of disabling disease and chronic disease. Rather than having that as a mindset, the general public is part and parcel of the paradigm the government has established, which is a crisis treatment, drug treatment mentality. So you wait until you become ill, you wait until your illness reaches a point where it is disabling for you, then you go to the doctor, then the doctor prescribes to you a drug. That drug may have deleterious effects. It may be very effective in mitigating the symptomology of your disease, but it may have deleterious effects. It would have been wiser, if possible, it's not always possible, it would be wiser to have taken a course that relied upon healthful products to minimize your risk of contracting an ailment or a disabling disease, chronic disease. But we have this crisis system, and that's to the maximum benefit of the drug industry, which holds the agency as a captive. Essentially, the agency is, Food and Drug Administration is without question a captive of the drug industry, and virtually every decision made by the agency is one in which cognizance, a very high degree of understanding, exists about the effects a decision will have upon the relative success or failure of drugs in the marketplace. And every commissioner understands that he or she will be in the agency for only a short time, and that when they leave, they will be best put by making decisions while they're in office that will ensure that the largest players who have the ability to richly reward them will have an incentive to reward them when they get out. So when you look at where FDA commissioners go when they leave, they frequently go to lobbying firms that are financed by these companies, to academia, positions, chairs that are financed by these companies, or to the boards of directors of the companies themselves, or to research groups that are financed by these companies. And they are paid substantially higher than they were paid in the government, and they live very rich lives like kings and queens for the rest of their days.